So up until now, most of my videos have dealt with the early game of TA, about establishing an economy, establishing military production, and then moving into the battlefield. Hopefully this will be a sort of mini-series within the series that will just talk about the game more broadly and about the RTS genre as a whole, and hopefully it can bring something to your game, so that you can get that extra 5% that brings you up into the next level. Early on, I talked about one of the fundamental principles of TA, and that was if you control the battlefield, you control the outcome. Sort of on that, it's a more broad sort of way to think about it, but I want to talk about the real resources in Total Annihilation, and every RTS, in fact, literally every single one. And you're saying, yeah, all right, so metal and energy, right? Yeah, I think we know how to handle metal and energy. So sure, you do, yeah. They're the tools that you use to, establish your sustainable economy and produce your military units. But in order to win, you need more than just energy and metal. The real resources of Total Annihilation are real-time and map space. You need to control more of the map than your opponent, and you need to secure that control first. That's how you win at TA. So in the early game, one of the first things you want to be doing is sort of building your first military. You want to get some units down so you can do some scouting, do some raiding, do all of that fun early game stuff. Do not underestimate the value of having radar towers, right? Even just the Tech 1 radars. A lot of people think that once they get their Tech 2 radar, they can just reclaim the Tech 1 radars and just do away with Tech 1 altogether. Not true. You need to have backups. You need redundancy, right? Think about like this is a real military conflict, You need redundancy in your force. So early on in the game, you're vying for map control. You're trying to take more of the map than your opponent. And you have to be doing that quicker than your opponent does. So you need small, cheap raiding parties of only 3 to 5 units each, just to scout really offensively. You want to be finding those early metal extractors, those early solar collectors, even to harass the early game units. I mean, this early on, we're talking about flash tanks and rockos. So those units early game, they're basically what makes up the meat of it. You want to be pushing that front line further and further toward your enemy, so that when the time comes, you have more of the map than your opponent does. I can't stress this enough. These are the two most important features of literally every single RTS, whether it's Age of Empires, Command & Conquer, Dawn of War. This is how it's won. You control more of the map, and you control it first. That's how you win every single RTS. When you're actually in-game and you're actually doing battle, think about sort of the flow of the war. I've talked about Dragon's Teeth quite a lot. I love them. I love Dragon's Teeth. I think everyone should use more Dragon's Teeth. But don't forget to build your defensive towers behind them, right? And don't forget to build defensive towers on the front line. Get construction units out there with your army, patrolling up and down the front line to repair units as they're fighting, but also to build defensive structures as you're moving forward. Build defenders and guardians behind you, and capture territories that way. If you're starved for energy, then pull back on your front line, build more solar collectors. You have that land. Once you've pushed your front line past it, and you feel like you've secured it, it's yours. Build whatever you want on it. And while you're watching this game, you can see that I'm using like metal makers and lots and lots and lots of solar collectors. I talked about this as an alternate energy source, an alternate resource strategy, but in reality, it's more of an augmented resource strategy, right? Like if you have an army and you're moving into battle, particularly if you're a fan of energy weapons cost energy, surprise, surprise. So if you have a lot of them that all fire at once, that creates a big drain on your energy supply. This is something you're going to have to deal with, and to deal with it, you're going to need surplus energy before you go into a fight. These are the things that you have to think about. This is economy management, right? If you have excess energy, simply build more metal makers. If you find yourself with excess metal, build more labs and produce more units. Always, it's this old rule in the RTS scene was be greedy. When you're on the map and you're vying for control, be greedy. If you can take it, because the game's going to end soon and you're going to want to win it, right? So if you can take a territory, you should. If you can secure that territory, you better, because that's exactly how you win. Now, further on in the game, right, particularly with TA, which is it's like about as real-time as a real-time strategy can get, you need to be establishing outposts featuring defensive structures, radar towers, maybe a lab, some other econ structures perhaps. You need to be protecting your high-value assets inside these outposts. This is when you're trying to push your front line, right? And not just to create big sandbag walls, big barriers, no, but actually creating away from your main base sort of production facilities, right? Closer to your enemy than your main base. Your main base still produces units, but those units need to be meeting more units further up front, right? You need to be replenishing the front line, and to do that, you have to be pushing that boundary. A quick trick to help you do this, right, is to have your commander guarding labs. Have lots of construction units guarding labs. Make sure that your military production takes priority. And in order to have that military production, you're going to need the economy behind it. So this is where the early game is really establishes the tone of the fight. You don't want to get into the point, sort of even as early as the middle game, where you find yourself in a sort of Cold War, where there's no combat going on. Both sides are just replenishing their forces, ready for another push. Right? You don't want to get to that stage. You want to be always pushing. You want to be always taking territory. I think I mentioned it back a couple of years back in the first few episodes I did, that if you control 51% of the battlefield, then you better win, right? Because that's an advantage. That's the best advantage you can possibly hope for. Speaking of the middle game, to transition into it, once you've sort of established as much as you think that you can before another tech upgrade, or if you anticipate a tech upgrade from your opponent, it's time to either build your first geothermal plant, or if you can't do that because you might be behind, it's time to bank some metal and build a fusion plant, because you can build them anywhere. This, in my opinion, I mean, it's debatable, right? But this marks the transition into the mid-game, is the construction of the first geothermal plant or the first fusion reactor. Not necessarily if it's Tech 2 units or any of that, but once you have the geothermal plant, the fusion reactor, you can move on to big berthas, to nukes. You have the energy that you can do more things with. But the first thing you should be doing is raiding, is building these little groups of 3 or 4 different little units, and moving on your opponent, and pushing those boundaries, seeing what he's doing. If you can get scout planes to fly over the top of your opponent's base, that's perfect. You can see what labs they've got up. You can see how much energy they have. You can compare what they have to what you have. This is how you win. This is the thinking that you need to adapt. You need to be smarter than your opponent thinks you are. I think that's the best lesson I can teach today. Well, that's all I have time to talk about today. I want to do at least 1 or 2 more of episodes like this, just to talk about more of the mid-game stuff, more of the late-game stuff, and more of the fundamental topics behind the RTS genre. But until then, happy fragging, guys. Talk to you soon. Provides a juicy nuke target for your enemy. Instead of producing a few units at once every 30 or so seconds, you could be producing 1 unit every 3 or 4 seconds at a time. And besides, a fleet of veteran con planes can build berthas